My knee hit the marble first, then my palms, then my cheek, cold, slick, humiliating, like the floor had been waiting for me all night. And the sound that followed wasn't concern. It wasn't a gasp. It wasn't someone rushing to help. It was my husband's laugh. A bright, careless burst that cut through the music like a knife, sharp enough to make the chandeliers seem to tremble. I remember thinking, oh, so this is who he is when I'm down. Because there's a kind of laughter you can forgive. Nervous laughter, startled laughter, the kind that slips out before you can catch it. His wasn't that. His was entertainment. Like I'd just performed a trick for him. Like I was a joke he'd been dying to tell. My body was still on the floor when I lifted my head, hair sticking to my mouth, tasting the salt of my own shame. The banquet hall around me swam, tables dressed in ivory cloth, crystal glasses, polite faces in formal wear, a whole room full of people who'd come to celebrate Jonah's promotion. Our perfect life. And there he was, standing by the champagne tower, hand still wrapped around a flute, eyes glittering, laughing at me. Grace, he choked out between chuckles. Oh my God, did you just... I pushed myself up with trembling arms, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs. My dress, midnight blue, chosen because he said it made me look expensive, was smudged along the hip. Something stung along my cheekbone. I could feel heat crawling up my neck. I'm fine, I lied, because I always did. But the room had changed. I felt it in the air before I heard it, like someone had reached over and turned the volume down on life itself. The clinking forks slowed. Conversations thinned into whispers. People were staring, but not at me the way they were supposed to. Not pity, not gossip, not amusement. Their eyes were locked on something else, something behind Jonah. And the silence didn't come gently. It hit like a door slamming. Jonah's laugh stumbled, confused. He looked around, still smiling, waiting for the crowd to join in like he was the star of the show. But nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Someone's glass slipped from their fingers and shattered, the sound cracking through the hush like a gunshot. Jonah's smile started to fall apart. "Hey," he said, voice a little too loud now, "what's with the funeral faces?" I finally followed their line of sight. And I saw her. At the entrance of the hall, framed by the gold-trimmed doors, stood a woman in a simple black coat, hair pulled back like she meant business. No gown, no jewelry, no attempt to blend in. She didn't look like she was here to celebrate. She looked like she was here to end something. In her hand was a folder, thick manila, the kind you only see in courtrooms and HR offices, and at her side stood a uniformed security guard with a rigid posture. Behind them, like shadows with purpose, were two more men in suits, not guests, not staff. They scanned the room like they owned it. Jonah's face drained so fast I saw the exact moment his body decided to panic. "Grace," he whispered, the laugh completely dead now. "Don't move." "Don't move?" I thought. I'm the one who fell. The woman stepped forward, heels clicking with calm certainty on the marble, and every click sounded like a countdown. I knew that face, not because we'd met, because I'd imagined it. Because for months I'd been haunted by the idea that Jonah had a life outside of me, something locked behind his phone screen and his sudden late meetings, something that smelled like cologne that wasn't mine and excuses that didn't fit. But I'd never had proof. I'd only had the feeling. And now that feeling was walking right toward us. Jonah set his champagne down with a hand that wasn't steady. "Not here," he said quickly, stepping forward as if he could block her, like his body could stop what was coming. "Please, we can talk. We're past talking," the woman said. Her voice was clear, professional, and somehow even colder than the floor I'd just kissed. A murmur rippled through the room, small, frightened waves. The woman turned slightly and nodded to the guard. "Mr. Jonah Hart?" The guard asked, firm and official. Jonah swallowed hard. "Yes, that's me. I'm going to need you to come with us, sir. Jonah let out a laugh that was nothing like before. This one was desperate, broken. Come with you? For what? This is ridiculous. But the woman opened the folder like it weighed nothing and everything at the same time. She pulled out papers with stamps and bold lines and signatures. Company audit, she said. Fraud investigation. Pending charges. Fraud. The word dropped into the room like a stone into a still pond. People flinched. Jonah's eyes flicked to me. For a second, he didn't look like a husband. He looked like a man calculating damage. Grace, he said quickly, like I could save him with a smile, this is a misunderstanding. You know me. You know I would never. The woman cut him off with one small raise of her hand, like she didn't have to shout to be obeyed. Mrs. Hart, she said, and that alone made my stomach tighten, because nobody used that title like it meant something dangerous. You should probably sit down. I didn't. My legs were shaking, but I stayed standing because I refused to be on the floor twice in one night. What is this? My voice came out thin, but it was mine. What did he do? Jonah's eyes pleaded with me, silent begging, warning, command, all at once. And I realized something in that moment that made my hands go cold. He wasn't scared for me. He was scared of me hearing the truth. The woman's gaze softened just slightly, just enough to tell me she wasn't here to hurt me. She was here because someone had to stop him. There are multiple irregularities, she said carefully. Misappropriated funds, falsified invoices, accounts routed through. She glanced down at her paper, then back up. A joint account. The air left my chest. A what? Jonah lunged a fraction, reaching for me like he could grab the words out of the air before they landed. Grace, please, he hissed, smile gone now, eyes bright with panic. Not here, not like this. But the room already knew. Their faces weren't just shocked, they were connecting dots. Because suddenly the expensive dress didn't look like a gift, it looked like evidence. I looked at Jonah, really looked, at his perfectly tailored suit, his polished shoes, the expensive watch he'd said was a bonus. The life he built like a stage set, where I was supposed to play the grateful wife and never ask how the lights stayed on. A joint account. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. You used me? Jonah's voice cracked. No. Grace, it's not like that. The woman took one more step closer, and the silence became unbearable. Mrs. Hart, she said, you may want to check your purse. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Because my purse was on the table. And Jonah had insisted earlier that he hold it for a second while I fixed my dress in the restroom. I turned slowly, every head turned with me, and when I reached my table, my fingers trembling as I flipped open the clasp, I felt something stiff and unfamiliar inside, not my lipstick, not my phone, not my compact. Paper. A folded envelope, thick as guilt. I pulled it out and opened it with hands that didn't feel like mine. Inside was a check, made out to me. For an amount so large my eyes couldn't process it at first, like my brain refused to believe numbers could look that criminal. And underneath the check, a small flash drive. Black. Plain. Like a bullet. The room wasn't just silent now, it was holding its breath. Jonah took one step toward me, voice shaking. Grace, don't open that. Please. I looked up at him, and my cheek still burned from the fall, but the pain was different now. It wasn't physical, it was clarity. Because the man who laughed at me on the floor was now terrified I'd stand up. And for the first time in my marriage, I realized something with absolute certainty. The fall hadn't been the humiliation. The fall had been the beginning. I closed my fingers around the flash drive. And the room stayed silent, because everyone knew something was about to break. Including me. My fingers were wrapped so tightly around that flash drive that the edges bit into my skin. I could feel my pulse in my thumb like a warning bell. Jonah's eyes locked onto it the way a drowning man locks onto air. Grace, he said again, softer now, like softness could rewind time. Please, Just give it to me." The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. Nearly. He'd laughed when I fell, and now he wanted mercy like he'd earned it. I glanced down at the check again. The number sat there, cold, clean ink, an amount big enough to buy a new life, and also big enough to destroy one. My name printed neatly across the top, as if he'd gift-wrapped my downfall. I looked up. Why is this in my purse? Jonah swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing. He flicked his gaze around the banquet hall, at the guests, the staff, the woman with the folder, the security guard still standing like a wall. His face tightened. "This isn't the place," he said, voice strained. "People are watching." "That didn't stop you from laughing at me." The words landed harder than I expected. A few people shifted in their seats. Somebody cleared their throat and immediately regretted making a sound. Jonah's mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. Then he forced a smile that looked like it hurt him. It was a reflex. "I didn't mean you meant it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to." The silence carried every word like it was being broadcast. The woman with the folder stepped closer, her gaze steady. "Mrs. Hart, I need you to understand something. If your name is attached to these accounts, you could be implicated." Implicated. My stomach twisted like a cloth being wrung out. "I didn't sign anything," I said. Quickly, and then my voice cracked because I suddenly wasn't sure. Because Jonah had always handled paperwork. Jonah had always been so helpful, so efficient, sliding forms toward me at the kitchen table with a casual, "Just sign here, babe." Boring stuff. Boring stuff. My hand started shaking. Jonah's eyes narrowed at the woman. She doesn't know anything. The woman's expression didn't shift. That's exactly why she needs to. Jonah took another step toward me. "Grace, look at me." I did, and I hated that there was a part of me, a dumb, trained part, that wanted to believe him, that wanted to pretend this was just a nightmare and we'd wake up tomorrow and laugh about it over coffee. But nightmares don't come with security guards. "Did you forge my signature?" I asked. Jonah's jaw clenched. "No, it was too fast, too clean." My chest tightened. "Did you use our joint account to move money?" He exhaled sharply, frustration flashing now, the mask slipping. "I used my account. It's under my name, too. That's not what I asked." Jonah's gaze darted, one quick flick to the guests, one to the guard like he was mapping exits, like he was already thinking about survival. I stepped back, instinctively putting the table between us. The flash drive felt heavier now, like it carried not just data, but decisions. "Grace," Jonah said, and the edge in his voice sharpened. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under." Pressure. I remembered the nights he came home late, tie loosened, smelling like expensive whiskey and arrogance, throwing his keys in the bowl with a dramatic sigh. "Do you know what it takes to keep us at this level?" He'd say, like I was lucky he worked so hard, like my comfort was a debt he paid. I remembered the way he'd criticized my spending. "Do you really need that?" While showing up with a new watch, a new suit, a new grin. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't you dare make this about providing." His face hardened, and then he did something that made my blood run cold. He smiled again. Not the charming smile he wore in photos. The other one. The one that said he'd already decided the story. "Fine," he said, lifting his hands in fake surrender. "You want the truth? I did what I had to do. And you," his eyes slid to the check. "You were part of the plan." The room seemed to shrink. The chandelier overhead felt too bright. Too exposed. My voice came out thin. "Part of the plan?" Jonah shrugged. "A clean wife looks better than a shady executive. A joint account looks like a family strategy. It spreads the risk. It frames me," I snapped. He blinked once, like he was impressed I'd caught up. "You think they'll believe you didn't know?" Jonah asked. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to feel intimate and cruel. "Grace, you sign things without reading. You trust me." "That's what you do." My throat tightened so hard it burned. Because he was right about one thing. I had trusted him. I'd trusted him with bills, with paperwork, with my future. I'd trusted him enough to stop asking questions, because every question had been turned back on me like I was ungrateful, paranoid, dramatic. I looked around the room at the faces watching us. Some were shocked. Some were fascinated. A few were, not surprised. Like they'd always known Jonah was capable of this, and they were only surprised I'd been foolish enough to marry him. The woman with the folder spoke again, calm but firm. "Mr. Hart, we need you to come with us now." Jonah's eyes flicked to the guard, his shoulders lifted, almost defiant. Then he turned back to me, eyes suddenly wet, voice wobbling into performance. "Grace," he said loudly, letting everyone hear, "tell them. Tell them you knew this isn't me. Tell them they're making a mistake. It was a trap, a beautiful, clever trap. Because if I defended him, I'd look complicit. If I stayed silent, I'd look guilty." I stared at him, and the humiliation of the fall surged back, only now it wasn't about my body on the floor. It was about my life. Because he'd been laughing while setting me up to take the blame. My fingers trembled as I lifted the flash drive slightly. "What's on this?" Jonah's face changed in an instant, panic flashing like lightning through his eyes. "Put it down," he hissed under his breath, the softness gone. "Grace, I swear to God," the woman's eyebrows lifted. "That device may contain evidence, Mrs. Hart. Do not give it to him." Evidence. The word buzzed in my ears. I looked at Jonah. Really looked. At the man who could laugh at me in public and threaten me in private with the same mouth. And suddenly, like a film snapping into focus, I remembered something from earlier that night. In the restroom, when I'd been fixing my lipstick, I'd looked in the mirror and noticed a faint bruise on my wrist. From last week. From the night he'd grabbed me too hard during an argument and then apologized with flowers the next morning. "I didn't mean it. You know I'd never hurt you." But he had. In little ways. In hidden ways. In ways that made me smaller, and tonight he'd tried to do it again, just bigger. I turned to the woman. "If I give this to you, will you tell me the truth?" She nodded slowly. "We'll do everything we can to protect you, but you need to cooperate fully." Jonah's eyes widened. "Grace, don't." His voice cracked, not with love, but with fear. Fear of losing control. I took a breath that felt like swallowing fire. Then I walked past Jonah. Past the champagne tower, past the table of executives who suddenly looked like they wished they were invisible. And I placed the flash drive in the woman's outstretched hand. The room didn't erupt. No one clapped. No one cheered. The silence stayed. Heavier now, because everyone understood what I'd just done. I hadn't just handed over a piece of plastic. I'd handed over my husband. And Jonah's face, God, his face, twisted into something ugly. The laugh was gone. The charm was gone. What was left was the man underneath. "You're making a huge mistake," he said through clenched teeth. I met his eyes. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "No, Jonah." I looked down at the check still in my hand, my name on it like a curse, and I tore it cleanly in half. Paper ripped loud in the quiet. A few people flinched like I'd slapped him. Jonah stared at the torn pieces, then at me, his mouth opening as if to speak. But he didn't. Because for the first time, the room wasn't laughing with him. The room was watching him lose. And seconds later, as the security guard stepped forward and placed a hand on Jonah's arm, the silence finally broke. Not with noise. With truth. Jonah jerked his arm away from the guard like the touch burned. "I didn't agree to this," he snapped, voice sharp now, stripped of all performance. "You can't just drag me out like some criminal." The irony almost made me dizzy. The guard didn't flinch. He tightened his grip, not rough, not gentle. Professional. Final. "Sir," he said evenly, "you're already cooperating more than you realize." Jonah laughed again, but this time it was hollow, frantic. "Grace, say something. Tell them you're my wife." I was standing just a few feet away, but it felt like we were separated by glass, thick, soundproof, unbreakable. "I am your wife," I said quietly. Or at least I was, until tonight made it clear what that actually meant to you. That did it. Something snapped behind Jonah's eyes. "You think this ends well for you?" he hissed, dropping his voice low. "You think handing over a flash drive makes you innocent? You're in this whether you like it or not." The woman with the folder stepped between us slightly, not protectively, but deliberately. Like she was drawing a line Jonah was no longer allowed to cross. "Enough," she said. "Mr. Hart, you've said more than you should already." Jonah glared at her, then at me. "You always were naive, Grace. I just didn't think you'd be stupid enough to destroy us both." The word us tasted bitter in my mouth. "There was never an us," I said. "There was you. And there was what you needed me to be." The room had started to breathe again. Soft murmurs slipped between tables. People leaned closer, hungry for details they'd pretend later they hadn't wanted to hear. Someone whispered Jonah's name. Someone else whispered fraud. And I realized this wasn't just my humiliation anymore. It was his exposure. As the guards began guiding Jonah toward the doors, he twisted once more to look at me. "Grace," he said, louder now, letting the room hear. "You think you're free? You think this makes you a hero?" He smiled without humor. "They'll come for you next." The doors closed behind him with a deep, echoing thud that vibrated through my bones. Gone, just like that. The man I'd built my life around was escorted out like an inconvenience. And suddenly, without Jonah's voice filling the air, the silence felt different. Not sharp, not threatening. Just empty. My knees buckled. I didn't fall this time. A chair scraped loudly as someone stood and pushed it toward me. A woman, someone I barely knew, a spouse of one of Jonah's colleagues, gently guided me down. "Sit," she whispered. "Please." I sat. My hands were still shaking. The woman with the folder crouched slightly in front of me, lowering her voice. "Mrs. Hart, Grace, are you okay?" I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for years. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think I finally understand." She nodded. "We'll need to speak privately. There will be questions." I figured. She hesitated, then added softly, "You did the right thing." I almost laughed. Right felt like such a small word for what I'd just lost. The party dissolved around me in awkward fragments. Guests quietly collecting coats, staff clearing untouched plates, the music never returning. Jonah's promotion celebration ended without a speech, without applause, without him. By the time I stepped out into the cold night air, the sky had turned a deep, bruised purple. My cheek throbbed where I'd hit the floor earlier, a dull reminder of how the night had started. A car waited by the curb, black, unmarked. The woman gestured toward it. "Just a conversation tonight. You won't be detained." I nodded numbly and climbed in. The city blurred past the window as we drove, lights streaking like tears I hadn't cried yet. Inside the small interview room, everything was beige and calm, designed to soothe people whose lives were falling apart. They offered me water. I accepted it with hands that still didn't feel like mine. They asked questions. I answered honestly. About the paperwork Jonah handled. About the joint account. About the flash drive I'd never seen before tonight. "What about this check?" the woman asked gently. I swallowed. He must have put it in my purse when I wasn't looking. Earlier, he insisted on holding it for me. She nodded, unsurprised. We suspected as much. "Why?" I asked. "Why bring this into a room full of people? Why not just arrest him quietly?" She studied me for a moment, then said, "Because men like Jonah don't panic in private. They panic when their image cracks." That hit harder than I expected. Because she was right. Jonah hadn't just been arrested. He'd been seen. Hours later, I stepped back outside alone. The night was quiet now. Too quiet. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Instead, I walked, heels in hand, dress brushing my knees until I reached the river. The water reflected the city lights in broken, shimmering lines. I sat on a bench and finally let myself cry, not sobbing, not dramatically, just tears slipping down my face, warm against cold skin. I cried for the years I'd spent shrinking, for the times I'd apologized when I wasn't wrong, for the laughter I'd mistaken for love. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message. From Jonah. "You'll regret this." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I blocked the number. It felt symbolic, like tearing the check in half all over again. As the sky began to lighten with the hint of morning, I realized something profound and terrifying. I didn't know who I was without him. But for the first time, that didn't feel like fear. It felt like possibility. Because the woman who fell on that marble floor and got laughed at, she didn't exist anymore. The woman who stood up in silence and handed over the truth, she was just getting started. The apartment smelled wrong when I finally went back. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Like a place that had learned how to breathe without you and hadn't decided yet if it wanted you back. I stood in the doorway for a long time, keys dangling uselessly from my fingers. The entry light flickered on, casting long shadows across the floor Jonah had insisted be polished every Friday. The same marble. The same cold shine. I kicked off my heels and let them fall where they landed. No laughter followed. That was the first thing that hit me. The silence here wasn't like the silence at the banquet hall. That one had been public. Heavy, watching. This silence was private. Intimate. It crept under my skin and asked questions. I walked slowly, like the space might accuse me of something if I moved too fast. The living room looked staged, as always. Couch cushions aligned, throw blanket folded just so. The framed photos on the wall, vacations, holidays, smiling versions of us that now felt like carefully edited lies. I stopped in front of one. It was from 3 years ago, taken at a charity gala. Jonah had his arm around my waist, pulling me close. I remembered that night clearly, not the photo, but the moment after, in the car, when I'd laughed too loudly at something he said, and he'd squeezed my thigh hard enough to bruise. "Tone it down," he'd whispered, smile still on for the valet. I reached up and took the photo off the wall. The frame felt heavier than it should have. I turned it face down on the console table. Something inside me loosened. I moved through the apartment like a detective now, not a wife. Opening drawers I'd never bothered with, checking folders Jonah had labeled taxes and misc, looking at paperwork with new eyes. The patterns were everywhere once I let myself see them. Accounts I didn't recognize, receipts that didn't match dates, names of companies that sounded real until you read them twice. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it, heart racing, before answering. "Hello? Grace?" a man's voice said. Calm. Older. "This is Daniel Reed. I'm with the firm handling Jonah Hart's case." My stomach tightened. "I don't have a lawyer." "You should," he said gently. "And I'm not calling to accuse you of anything. I'm calling because you're not the only one." I sank onto the couch. "Not the only one what?" "Wife," he said. Or rather, wife used as insulation. The words landed slowly. "There are 3 others," he continued. "Different cities. Different companies. Same pattern. Joint accounts. Forged signatures. Large transfers routed through spouses who trusted him." My mouth went dry. "Did they know?" "No," he said. "Not until it was too late." I closed my eyes. "How many of them fell?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. "All of them, just not in the same way." After the call ended, I sat there long past the time my phone screen went dark. I wasn't special. That realization hurt and healed at the same time. I wasn't uniquely stupid. I wasn't uniquely blind. I'd been targeted. The next few days blurred into something that didn't feel like time. Meetings, statements, lawyers who spoke carefully and looked at me like I might break if they used the wrong word. Sleep came in fragments. Food tasted like cardboard, and every time I closed my eyes, I heard Jonah's laugh echoing off marble. On the fourth night, I woke from a dream where I was falling again, but this time no one laughed. I was alone. I padded into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, hands steady now in a way they hadn't been before. On the counter sat a small velvet box. Jonah's watch. The one he'd worn like a crown. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. Expensive. Impressive. Empty. I placed it in a drawer and closed it gently. In the morning I went to the bank. I expected panic. Judgment. Suspicion. Instead, the woman behind the desk looked at me with something like recognition. "You're Mrs. Hart," she said softly. "Yes," I replied. Then, after a beat, "For now." She smiled, just a little. "We'll help you untangle this." Untangle. I liked that word, because knots could be undone. Weeks passed. The story hit the news, not with my name at first, but Jonah's. Headlines screamed about betrayal, deception, corporate scandal. His photo everywhere. My face mercifully absent, at least until it wasn't. I saw myself one morning on a screen at the gym, a still from the banquet hall. Me standing there in my blue dress, clutching something small in my hand, eyes wide, but unbroken. The caption read, "Wife hands over evidence as CEO arrested mid-celebration." I didn't recognize the woman at first. Then I did. And I realized something startling. She looked strong. People started reaching out. Friends I hadn't heard from in years. Women I barely knew. Messages that said things like, "I saw it happen, and you were brave, and thank you for doing what I couldn't." One message stopped me cold. It was from a woman named Lila, one of the other wives. "He made me feel crazy too," she wrote. Until he didn't anymore. I met Lila for coffee a few days later. We didn't talk much about Jonah. We didn't need to. The space between us was filled with understanding. "I thought falling would kill me," she said quietly. "Turns out, staying was worse." I nodded. That night, back in the apartment, I packed a suitcase. Not everything, just enough. I paused in the bedroom, looking at the bed we'd shared. The nightstand where he'd left his phone face down. The mirror where I'd once practiced smiling so I wouldn't embarrass him. I touched the bruise on my wrist. Gone now. But not forgotten. I left the apartment keys on the counter. Not because I couldn't come back, but because I didn't need to. As I stepped outside, the city felt different. Louder. Sharper. More real. I walked without looking down. Without hurrying. Without apologizing. And for the first time since that night, the night I fell and he laughed, I realized something else. The silence that followed hadn't been about him at all. It had been the sound of everyone realizing the story had changed. Including me. The courtroom smelled like old wood and recycled air. It wasn't dramatic the way movies make it. No sweeping music. No gasps every 5 seconds. Just rows of benches, muted colors, and a quiet so controlled it felt manufactured. I sat on the hard wooden seat with my hands folded in my lap, spine straight, eyes forward. Jonah hadn't seen me yet. That was intentional. I wanted to see him first. When they brought him in, the difference was almost jarring. The man who used to fill rooms with confidence now moved smaller, shoulders slightly hunched, suit wrinkled like it had given up trying to impress anyone. No watch, no smile. His hair looked thinner, his face older. Good, I thought. Reality ages you fast. He scanned the room, restless, until his eyes landed on me. For a split second, something crossed his face, hope, maybe. Or habit, like he still expected me to stand up and fix things. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. And I watched with a strange calm as that hope died. The prosecutor began laying out the case methodically. Dates, amounts, shell companies, screenshots, email trails, the flash drive, my flash drive. Hearing it referenced out loud felt surreal, like listening to a story I'd once lived, but no longer belonged to. Evidence appeared on screens, charts, transfers, signatures. My name. Printed there in black and white. My stomach tightened, but I stayed still. Because this time, I wasn't alone. When the defense tried to suggest I'd been aware, the judge shut it down quickly. The forged signatures were obvious now, the pattern undeniable. I watched Jonah as his lawyer whispered urgently into his ear. Jonah didn't laugh, he didn't smirk, he didn't even pretend anymore. And then, like a gift I hadn't asked for but needed, the judge called my name. Mrs. Hart. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I stood. Every step toward the witness stand felt heavier than the last, but my legs didn't shake. Somewhere between the fall on marble and this moment, fear had burned itself out. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth. And then I did. I spoke about the paperwork, the trust, the way Jonah controlled the finances and framed it as taking care of us. I spoke about the check, the purse, the flash drive. I spoke about the laugh. That part surprised them. The prosecutor asked gently, "Why is that relevant?" I looked straight at Jonah. Because it tells you who he is when he thinks no one will hold him accountable. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jonah's jaw tightened. I didn't spare him. I talked about the bruise, the flowers, the apologies that came wrapped in affection and blame. I talked about shrinking, about how easy it is to disappear when someone convinces you that you're safer being quiet. When I stepped down from the stand, my knees finally trembled. But I didn't fall. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited like vultures. I paused at the top of the steps. Flashes exploded. "Grace, over here. How does it feel? Do you forgive him?" The questions blurred into noise. I raised my hand, not dramatically, just enough. "I didn't come here to forgive," I said. "I came here to tell the truth." Then I walked away. The verdict came weeks later, guilty, multiple counts, years. I heard about it on a Tuesday morning, standing in line at a cafe, holding a cup of coffee I'd started taking black. No sugar, no apology. I felt nothing at first. Then I felt everything. Not relief, not joy. Closure. Jonah sent one last message from a number I didn't recognize. "You think you won." I stared at the screen for a long time, then I deleted it without replying. Because winning had never been the point. The apartment was officially sold by then. The money, what was left, was tied up in legal processes that no longer terrified me. I'd moved into a smaller place across town. Sunlight in the mornings. Plants on the windowsill. A life that didn't echo. One afternoon, I found the blue dress in the back of my closet. The one from the night everything broke open. I held it up, studying the faint stain on the hip where I'd hit the floor. I considered throwing it away. Instead, I folded it carefully and placed it in a box. Not to keep the pain, to remember the moment. Because that dress marked the line between who I was and who I became. I started volunteering, quietly, intentionally. A local group that helped women navigate financial abuse, legal confusion, the aftermath no one prepares you for. I didn't tell my story at first. Then one day, a woman across the table from me said, "He laughs when I get hurt. Like it's funny." My chest tightened. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Then listen to me," I said. "That laugh is the truth." She cried. I stayed. That night, walking home, I realized something had shifted again. Jonah's story no longer defined the chapters of my life. It was just a footnote, a cautionary one. I slept deeply that night, dreamless, and when I woke up, the memory of falling didn't sting anymore. It felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else. Almost. The first thing I noticed about my new place was the sound. Not traffic, not sirens, not the distant thrum of a city that never really sleeps. Birds. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd woken up to something alive that wasn't demanding something from me. The window was open. curtains lifting and settling with the breeze, and sunlight spilled across the floor in a way that felt unearned, like peace you don't trust yet, because you're waiting for it to be taken away. I lay there for a while, listening. No footsteps, pacing the hall. No sigh of irritation, no voice correcting the way I breathed, just quiet. The good kind. I made coffee and stood barefoot in the kitchen, watching steam curl upward like a promise. My hands didn't shake anymore. They hadn't in weeks. I noticed small things now, how my shoulders sat lower, how my jaw unclenched without effort, how my reflection looked. Present. I didn't rush. There was no one to impress. Later that morning, I walked past a boutique window and stopped. The reflection caught me off guard. I looked different. Not dramatically. No makeover montage. No sudden glow-up. Just solid. Grounded. Like someone who knew where she stood. I smiled at my reflection. Soft. Unpracticed. And kept walking. That afternoon, I received a letter. Handwritten. The envelope was plain. No return address. For a split second, my chest tightened. Old instincts flared, the reflex to brace, to prepare for impact. But when I opened it, the handwriting wasn't Jonah's. It was Lila's. I testified today, the letter read. I didn't shake. I thought of you. I sat down slowly, letter pressed to my chest. She went on to write about rebuilding, about nights that were still hard, about mornings that felt like miracles. About learning to trust her own voice again. At the bottom, she wrote, "He laughed when I cried too. I thought that meant I deserved it. Now I know better." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, not hidden, not displayed. Just kept. That evening I walked by the river again. The same bench, the same water. But everything else felt different. The city lights shimmered across the surface, fractured and beautiful, just like the truth, never clean, never simple, but honest. I sat and watched couples pass by, friends laughing, people living their lives without knowing mine had once been held hostage by a man who mistook control for love. I thought about the fall, about how my body had hit the floor before my heart understood what was happening. About how humiliation had burned hotter than pain. About the laugh. That laugh had been the sharpest sound I'd ever heard, not because it was loud, but because it revealed everything. It stripped him bare. Because when someone laughs at you when you're hurt, they're telling you the truth about how they see you. And that truth is a gift, even when it's cruel, especially then. I stood up and brushed off my hands, grounding myself in the moment. A man jogged past and smiled politely. I smiled back. No calculation. No second guessing. Just human to human. When I got home, I opened the box where I'd placed the blue dress. I ran my fingers over the fabric one last time. I didn't hate it anymore. It wasn't cursed. It wasn't weak. It was a witness. I took the dress out, folded it once more, and donated it the next day, not because I wanted to forget, because I didn't need to carry it. Weeks later, I was asked to speak at a small gathering, nothing public, nothing televised, just a room full of women sitting in a circle, some with coffee, some with tissues, all with stories that hadn't been believed enough. I didn't prepare a speech. I just stood there and told them about a night that started with celebration and ended in silence, about a fall, about a laugh, and about the moment the room went quiet, not because of me, but because the truth had finally walked in. I told them this: sometimes the worst thing that happens to you isn't the worst thing. Sometimes it's the thing that saves you. No one applauded. They didn't need to. When I walked home that night, I felt something settle in my chest. Final. Complete. Jonah no longer haunted my thoughts, not even as anger. He existed only as contrast, as proof, as the before. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me, gently, deliberately. And in that moment, standing alone in a space that belonged entirely to me, I understood the symbolism I'd been missing all along. The fall wasn't about humiliation. It was about gravity. About being pulled, finally, out of a lie. And the silence that followed, that wasn't judgment. It was recognition. The sound of a story ending, and another one beginning.